Good evening, everybody. My name is Dan Keller. I'm the police chief for White Lake Township. And on behalf of White Lake Township and the White Lake Township Library, I would like to welcome you to the first Civic District Development Study Community Meeting. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I am representing a District Planning Advisory Committee that has been formed between Township and Library representatives to study an area of White Lake Township that we are referring to as a potential civic district. It was important for our committee to solicit input from the community in this important process. This evening, we have a presentation by representatives from the consultant group Inform Studio, who are here to explain the process, present some early research, and show everyone how they can participate and contribute to this important effort for our community. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael Guthrie and Eric Klooster from Inform Studio. Thank you.
Can I take that out? Can everybody hear me okay?
Oh yeah.
Oh, sorry, that was loud. It was so quiet, sorry. Sometimes I think I need to talk like this, but I'll use the microphone. So, thank you, Dan, for the introduction. We just want to thank everybody for being here. This is a really exciting, we think, opportunity. We were really excited to be a part of this process. I think what we want to do here this evening is really just explain it to you. What does it look like? And what is the timing of it? And most importantly, how can you participate and be a part of it? And I think what we really want this community to understand is that your input is so critical to this process. That in fact, any kind of study, any kind of planning, any type of proposal that would come out of this has to be from the input of the community that it serves. And so I hope that you'll see that as we walk through this. I'm essentially just going to present a little bit of the process and what it looks like, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and he's going to walk you through some initial research and then talk to you about how to participate. So if we could just kind of looking at this map up here, essentially this delineates more or less the area of study that, that we're talking about. So let me talk about the title first, just so that this makes sense. We're calling this the Civic District Development Study of White Lake Township. So we like little catchy acronyms, so we called it, CITY. Makes it a little bit easier, so you can refer to it as the City Development Study. But essentially, how this started was talking with the township, talking with the library about parcels that are essentially adjacent to one another, but are also adjacent to really a little bit of a central part of the community that's looking for some definition. And so what we felt like needed to happen when we were approached with this is, hey, what we should really do is kind of study a given area, and we'll talk about maybe how the boundary of that was delineated, to understand the impact of total. Okay, if we're looking at something where there could be a township development, a civic component of it, and then also the library, how does that really integrate into a much bigger picture of things? So we understand that there's processes that are in motion already, but it's good in that process to also be able to look at, hey, what are the big picture implications of everything? So that's kind of the idea, the overarching idea behind this process. There's a little bit of verbiage up here with the picture, and I'm going to kind of read this, but I'll explain it as I read it. The intent of the Civic District Development Study is to galvanize the development interests of municipal, educational, and commercial entities into a synthesized concept. That's a whole bunch of stuff. What does that mean? So what we talked about is we've got municipal, educational, commercial, in other words, future things that are looking to go into that area, but also existing areas, including housing. And then when we talk about galvanizing them or synthesizing them together, how do we increase the quality of relationships between all of these things? And so that's the idea of this study. In other words, let's not just look at putting one thing here and then not talking about how it relates to everything else. Let's talk about the relationships of all of these things together. The study region has been determined by an area that could be impacted by the development of a new White Lake Township library and municipal complex. So exactly what that is in terms of the municipal complex, that's the point of this whole thing, is to solicit your feedback. So this is not an evening to tell you what it is or what the answers are. This is an evening to solicit information from you on what you think it should be. Beyond that, it's guided by a district planning advisory committee. I'm going to kind of skip to the next one, and I'll be able to explain this last paragraph within this. So what was put together in this, and we started this process a little over or a little under a month ago, believe it or not. It's pretty quick. So if you look essentially from this August period is when this process began, and we are at 9:13 tonight, the study analysis community presentation. So about a month is what we call the analysis phase of things. So that's how we gather information, get information, and then interpret that information. So we are very much in just an information gathering phase with this whole thing. What was done early on at the beginning is to create this district planning advisory committee that Dan said that he was representing tonight. So kind of a lot going into that. Sometimes we call it DPAC, which is a little bit shorter. Again, I like acronyms, I can't help it. But the idea is that, hey, we have some people who are key impact groups within this and can inform us on, hey, what kind of information do we need to start to look at? Who do we need to involve early on to get things? So this was a great key group to start with, so that then we could develop what we've called impact groups. So there were 4 key impact groups that were developed. And so this is around August 28th. What we did is we met with 4 different impact groups. Those impact groups were adjacent property and development impact group. In other words, all the people that own property around that area that I showed you at the very beginning. And then people who have been developers in the area, potential future developers for those property. What are they thinking about? How are they thinking about it? We had an educational impact group, which was different representatives from some of the different schools to get an understanding of how the youth and how education could potentially be impacted. But we also asked really broad questions. Then the other 2 groups were essentially the library impact group and then the township impact group. So why did we get those 4 groups together, and what was their purpose? That was to get at least a start of what's a little bit of an understanding of White Lakes Township, so that when we put together questionnaires, surveys, maps to kind of understand things, we're giving you, the stakeholders, which is the most important contingent within this, something to start from. In other words, if we just walked in and had kind of a blank slate and said, hey, what do you think? It's very difficult to kind of respond. So we're trying to get lots of ideas of different things to start to look at and information to go in. There's also what you're going to find in this process is the ability to give us just free feedback, solicit feedback in the questionnaires and surveys. But that's essentially what the impact group was. They set the tone and the start of what are the things that we ask about and we look about within things. We came back and met with essentially our advisory committee, flipped again, the advisory committee again, which was this steering committee, to be able to set up this evening and what it would start to look like. So that's really what this has been about. So 2 other things that I want to go over before I turn this over to Eric. The first is that one of the things we were able to start at the very beginning of the analysis phase was kind of a physical study of the environment. So what you'll see is we've taken a ton of GIS data, that's global information systems, so there's all kinds of great resources like SEMCOG and people like that put together digital information, physical survey information, all of those types of things that we can then plug into a computer, and it gives us the opportunity to look at different layers of things of the physical environment. And what Eric's going to do is kind of present some of that. Hey, here's some initial findings in the area. A lot of this, we hope, will confirm things that you know to be true already, but it gives a little bit of a graphic representation of that. You might have seen there were 10 boards out in front here. Those 10 boards represent some of the content that you'll see here that'll help give you an overview. So as you walk away from this, you can go back and look at those, and you can ask questions about what you're seeing on those maps with 6 of us that'll be out there afterwards. But it really gives kind of a good physical assessment. Again, it's not proposals, it's just saying, here's what is existing here. And the great part of it is you can say, I agree or I disagree. So what we'll talk about is, what does the format for that look like? So what we've done is we've set up 2 websites. One of them is a survey. It's great. It has a way to kind of respond to all kinds of information and then have open links. How we see this process working is we want to give everybody the opportunity to have a voice in this. So I know there's a limited amount of people here relative to the 12,000 plus residents of White Lake Township. 30,000, my bad. 12,000 mailers, right? 30,000 plus residents. But what we want to do is give a voice to all that group. So please, we have flyers that are out there that you can take away. This is being posted on the social media sites and also the township website so that you can get access to these two links. So what are these two links? What they are is one is going to be a mapping site. It's called Map Social. What you'll be able to do is engage with that to be able to put comments in different areas, and we have categories that you can make comments in. There's also kind of an open area so you can make a comment about anything, anywhere within this Civic District study area. So Eric will go over a little bit what that will look like in terms of a process, and then what we want to invite you to do is if you have questions about how to get on that website, we have computers that are out there, and we will show you how to access it on the website, and you can take away any of the information for the links and things like that. So we want to make sure that it's accessible for everybody to participate. The great thing is, you'll have several days to be able to do it, think about it, talk with friends. You may put something up, then decide a couple days later, hey, you know what, I thought about this, I want to put this up there too. It's a great resource then to be able to collect all of that data in one location. So that's the map side of it. The other is there's a second link, which will take you to a survey, which is a simple series of questions about things, and we'll go over some of those questions. But those will really give you an opportunity to then engage with certain things that have been brought up so far by the impact groups of things to think about or study about. So essentially what we're looking to do is finish, I did it again, my bad. Is finish the analysis phase kind of within a week or so period of time, and then we'll begin putting together the idea of some concepts. So here's how it looks from here. After we're able to do kind of the research and the analysis, then we'll put kind of a series of proposals together for different options of how this area can be looked at. And when we talk about the area, I am going to back up a couple real quick. We're probably talking about something all within this, a larger district, right? And this could go right down to bike paths, how to bring people into a civic community, transit. We're looking at much bigger things than a building and a parking lot. What does it mean in terms of connectedness within the area? Is it important to you? Isn't it important to you? And you'll see that in the surveys and how we walk through things. So really that's the idea, is that we would have sort of 3 different concepts for how something like this might work. Think of it as a network is probably the best way to describe it. And then with those 3 concepts, we come back to you again, just like a format like this one. Very similar. And that would be on October 18th. So about a month from now, a little over a month from now. And when we present those, the idea is not, hey, I like A, or I like B, or I like C. The idea is that you'll go through a very similar process that we're going to show you out here for commenting on the maps, so that you can say, hey, this really works over here, but this doesn't work very well over there on this particular one. So the idea is not, okay, pick A, B, or C. Find aspects. The idea is it's just putting visual ideas out there that you can respond to. And what we want to try to do is make sure that all 3 of those plans, option A may be a lot different than option C, because we may get some input from a community member who says, hey, I want to see something like this, and somebody else who says something that's really different. And as that starts to aggregate, maybe we start to see, wow, there's a lot of people that are saying they want to see this, and there's a lot of people that are saying we want to see this. So let's look at both options within this, and then everybody can see what that looks like, what that feels like as a strategy or an approach. So after we have the opportunity to get all of that feedback, I did it one more time, we would go into kind of a final draft concept. And the idea is to, okay, we take all of the community feedback, everything that we get, we kind of synthesize that into one idea to say, hey, we feel like this would be kind of a best strategy going forward. And essentially at that point, that allows the township and the library to decide what they want to do with things and kind of move it from there. But what we look at it being is hey, this is the opportunity for the community to really synthesize all of their comments. All of the information will be, public, and will provide this type of information as a public resource so that people can get access to it. The one thing that we want to make sure that we do tonight that's really important is that we want to facilitate this in such a way so that everybody's heard. And the only way to do that is so that we can take comments and we can take all of those things after we make the presentation here this evening. So how we'll do this is Eric's going to come up, he's going to go ahead and go through the presentation of the information. He will talk a little bit about how to do the participation, kind of the technology-wise, and then there will be 6 of us and people from Township and maybe Library too will help facilitate kind of going through that process. We'll have computers that are out there. Please come ask us questions about what you see in the content if you have any questions, or more importantly, how to access the survey and looking at the map data and things like that. So that's really how we look to facilitate the process. So Eric, why don't you go ahead and get started with the presentation, and then I'll wrap up to dismiss us to answer any questions or anything out back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. That's a wonderful introduction to the process that we're going to engage moving forward. I just want to start by introducing the area that we're looking at, and we're calling this the Civic District study because it's focused on the area that can be impacted directly by the generation of a new civic campus, incorporating Township Hall, potentially fire and police, library, and the civic municipal functions that are important to the way that White Lake Township will work. So the district that we have defined is pretty centrally located within the boundaries of White Lake Township. That is part of our strategy for really starting to create a nucleus, a downtown nucleus that could provide an identity for White Lake Township that has spatial qualities. If we look at the district specifically, it's focused at the intersection of M59 and Elizabeth Lake Road. The property that you see outlined here is the campus that combines the library and township parcels. So the idea is that we're going to look at this area as the civic campus that can then start to infiltrate and set up planning for the surrounding area. And this area specifically is the area that we've defined that could be most heavily impacted by that development at the civic campus. This area is defined a lot by geographical boundaries. We have the lakes, as well as the existing road system that is set up to really define a nice clean boundary that could be impacted and start to form that nucleus, that downtown center. One of the characteristics that really came out from a lot of our impact groups is the recreation that's available in White Lake Township. There's a tremendous number of park opportunities with the 2 state recreation areas. And these offer all sorts of opportunities from hiking, biking, fishing, trails, hunting, and a lot of the sort of characteristics that will define what White Lake Township means to a lot of people. When we look at our campus boundary specifically, we have a couple of areas, one being Judy Hawley Park, that has some sports fields and some walking areas, as well as the Brendel Lake Campground. The campground is private access, but it has a lot of opportunities with beach access, boat launch, etc. One of the things we're going to look at with our study is how we can really bring a lot of these characteristics, these elements that define the character of what White Lake Township is as far as recreational opportunities, how to incorporate those and layer those into the Civic District and the campus itself to create a network that really starts to connect the characteristics throughout the entire township. One of the first things we want to look at when we start to analyze and set up master planning is the existing land use. The zoning, the way it is set up right now, is a lot of single-family residential areas and some planned commercial developments and some general business areas, mostly focused along the M59 corridor. These developments are relying tremendously on the visibility that M59 supplies, as well as the connectivity. This particular area has a further market reach than a lot of areas does because of M59. It has a strong east-west access that connects a large number of communities and a long distance. So a lot of people can come into this area and start to access those commercial opportunities. What we want to look at as part of our campus study is how these parcels can start to be affected to create a more pedestrian-friendly and walkable community that starts to synergize all the interests of the community and create a really downtown center nucleus that can start to provide an identity for White Lake Township. Looking at the existing figure ground studies, these dark gray boxes indicate your building footprints. So what you see is a lot of these small single-family residential developments, as well as some larger big box retail strip type centers, and a lot of open area. So as we start to move forward and look at possibilities for creating walkability, we start to look at what kind of densities and what kind of figure ground makeups start to facilitate those developments. Looking a little closer at that figure ground and what kind of use groups are being used right now within the buildings that exist. Again, similar to the zoning, a lot of your commercial functions are located strictly on the M59 corridor. And then your single-family residential districts, as well as a senior housing facility, elementary school, worship center, and some of your municipal functions located over here. But again, most of that commercial development is centered on M59, and a lot of it is these large big box retail centers. What we're looking at here is the land utilization. And one of the factors that we use to describe land utilization is FAR, or floor area ratio. And what that describes is your built floor area in comparison to the total land area of the parcel. When you look at areas that are more attuned to walkability and have a more pedestrian-friendly network, you will see floor area ratios that are closer to 1. What we have in these two areas is a 0.17 or 0.12. So those floor area ratios are pretty small, comparable to some of the defining characteristics of walkable development. And one of the things that we're seeing that we think really impacts that, and we see as a potential opportunity as we look at developing concepts for this district, is your parking area and your stormwater management. So in both of these areas, you have 50% or more of the land dedicated to surface parking and stormwater management. So there are potential opportunities looking at infrastructure and consolidating parking, looking at right-sizing parking to really start to increase your potential optimization of that land use. Another one of the things that's, the lakes and the wetlands really define the geographical makeup of White Lake Township. One of the potential concerns with that regarding development is land potential. And when we talk about land potential, we're looking at potentially developable land areas. So individual parcels might have 25% that's developable, 75%, et cetera. And looking at this analysis, we see that a large portion within the Civic District is 75 to 100% developable, which is really encouraging moving forward, because not all areas in White Lake Township have that same characteristic. We see some areas down here, closer to Brendel Lake, where there's some really high concentrations of wetlands that aren't necessarily developable from a building standpoint, but can provide other opportunities when you look at wetland amenities. The next category that we really looked at was the transportation network that's currently set up for White Lake Township. When you look at the road system, you have your primary transportation corridor, which is M59, and then these smaller connectors, Teggerdine, Elizabeth Lake Road, and then Oxbow Road, dying into that. These speed limits are what I would call maybe advisory based on my experience going through the area. More suggestions than anything. So looking at your entire street system with high speeds and high volumes, that really contradicts what you want to see when you start to look at walkable communities and a highly networked community. So some of the opportunities moving forward is looking at potential street calming and how do we route traffic appropriately so that it's safe for pedestrians as well as efficient for vehicular traffic. Again, looking at the characterization of the existing road system, we have Highland Road M59, which is a large 5-lane highway, very high speeds, very high traffic volumes. And then we have some smaller roads and some 2-lane roads that feed into that connector. These conditions are based on a SEMCOG analysis, and so fair conditions requires continued maintenance and is heading towards requirements for replacements. This poor condition is they advise replacement. So we look at some of these feeder roads that start to feed into this main corridor, and because of their condition and because of their existing makeup, we start to see opportunities to potentially create impactful developments around these roads. And then, again, traffic volume, and analyzing those in connection to the control systems that are in place. Highland Road, very highly trafficked road with several stoplights to try and control traffic. Now, from here to here, in a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, while I was out there, I witnessed people probably getting up to 60. So the idea moving forward is to look at how we potentially address development along this highly trafficked corridor to make it safe for pedestrians as well as make it efficient for vehicles and not sacrifice the benefits of one for the benefits of the other. And something that's really important when we start to look at creating a connected pedestrian network is your intersections. Intersections function as a way to calm traffic as well as to create connections for pedestrians as well as your vehicles. So when we look at these connections and their proximity, we start to see opportunities for how we can impact our flows of pedestrians as well as vehicular traffic through the use of strategic intersections. And then looking at our sidewalk system, if you want to call it that, within this area. There is a very segmented and interrupted start to a pedestrian network, really focused primarily along Highland Road and 59 with some newer walks based primarily around this development. When we start to look at creating pedestrian-friendly environments, you want a complete network system. Dead ends in the system cause big problems, and then the system doesn't get used at all. So in order to make this function correctly, we have to look at opportunities for creating a completely networked system that really starts to connect different types of functions where people might want to utilize the system. So looking at what some of those existing connections look like. M59 and Elizabeth Lake Road, we have a stoplight there with pedestrian traffic signals. This is kind of really your main connection. It's a 5-lane highway with a fairly short interval, and there's not a connected sidewalk network on the other side. So you really cross the street into nowhere. Down here on Elizabeth Lake Road, path ends. Those are the types of opportunities that we see for potential intervention where we start to create a fully networked pedestrian system. And then some of the quality along Highland Road for the sidewalk network. We have a lot of sidewalks very close to Highland Road, which is really formally not great because the 50-mile-an-hour speed limit and 65-mile-an-hour traffic is really not great for pedestrians as you're trying to frogger across these entrances. And then some of the sidewalk system is really dying into a parking lot where you're dealing with vehicular traffic and a large sea of surface parking, and you don't have really a dedicated pedestrian network that can facilitate safe passage and connection points. Again, we look at the roads and how they really start to define the makeup of the infrastructure, and we call it, in dense urban areas, we call it the urban fabric. It starts to formalize the development. In walkable communities, a lot of times, this road street system is reinforced by your buildings, by your figure ground. So when you take the streets away, you still have a nice defined space based on your building volume. And they start to create appropriate scales where people feel comfortable, people feel safe walking in those areas because they're in a defined space. Areas like this, where it's large open areas with surface parking, tends to create a feeling of discomfort in large open spaces because there's no defined space. These transportation or pedestrian networks are not defined by the actual built volume. Just a quick comparison of some similar square mile areas. So this is a tool that we like to use to kind of see where an urban fabric stacks up compared to benchmark communities. So we know White Lake Township is not Boston, but Boston has some success in its network of pedestrian communities and its street system in order to create walkable communities that are sustainable economically, environmentally, socially, etc. So what you can see here is really a stark contrast in the street network system, where we have a tremendous number of intersections that really function to calm traffic and facilitate that connected network that you're trying to create when you're talking about a pedestrian-friendly development. One of the kind of defining characteristics, like we've mentioned with White Lake Township, is the vast system of state recreation areas and parks. And part of that is bike trails, hiking trails. And Oakland County has initiatives to really start to create a network of trails that focuses on their green space. So these state recreation areas up here and the state recreation areas down here can really start to be connected potentially through this green trail network. So these are things that we see as potential opportunities to tie a pedestrian-friendly network into to create a broader connected network that really can impact the entire township of White Lake and not just this small district. Talking about transportation, you have to at least look at alternative forms of transportation. White Lake Township is very vehicular focused. There's a strong use of the vehicle for individuals in the area. The existing smart bus network, the closest points are in Pontiac at 12 miles away and Farmington Hills at 16 miles away. So this lack of connection to that network really starts to focus the attention primarily on vehicular access into the area. Another kind of category that we want to look at is housing. So we start to look at what types of housing is currently being used, what types of housing are potentially underserved, and where are opportunities to create a broader spectrum of diverse housing that starts to bring in a broader spectrum of diverse constituents. So when we look at the housing types that are currently within the Civic District boundary, you see a very strong predominance of single-family residential homes. We have a small contingent of multifamily properties with the apartment complex here and the condo complex here, and then a focused senior housing facility, long-term care rehab facility in the neighborhoods. Some of those housing typologies you see in this single-family residential neighborhood, some smaller, more closely spaced, almost cottagey type residences with some bigger, more contemporary homes potentially along the waterfront. The neighborhoods facility, like you mentioned, the long-term rehab senior center, some of these larger single-family developments on larger estates type lots, where you see the broader spacing, the cul-de-sac organization, and kind of the single street access. And then some of these more densely gridded type single-family residential organizations. One of the topics that was brought up during our impact group studies was the availability for entrance of young families and starter homes in White Lake Township. So that kind of forced us to look at what type of home values are currently available within our civic district, and how do we potentially create opportunities out of those. And you see less than 10% of your housing stock is under that $150,000 mark. So when we see things like that, we see potential opportunities to create a more diverse type of housing that can bring in a diverse demographic into the area and really create that social sustainability that you get by mixing different economic levels and different backgrounds. We have to talk about nature because of it's really defining it's defining nature for White Lake Township. It's defined a lot by its lakes, it's defined a lot by its parks and its recreation opportunities. And it's defined a lot by its wetland natural areas. So when we look at White Lake Township as a whole, we try to get an understanding of the characteristics of the existing lake system. And so we look specifically at the public access lakes to really start to define the characteristics of what the lake community in White Lake Township is. And so you see lakes like Pontiac Lake, which are your larger lakes, Cedar Island Lake, Long Lake, Teeple Lake, and White Lake, and you try to understand the characteristics of those lakes. And so you look at White Lake, and it's got a lot of fishing, it has a lot of recreation opportunities. You look at Teeple Lake, and it's part of the state recreation area, and it's focused more on canoeing, fishing, kayaking, etc. And looking at a closer scale of the lakes that are kind of directly impacted by the Civic District implementation. And so we look at Brendel Lake, which has the only kind of shorefront along the Civic District. Oxbow Lake, which is nearby and adjacent, and then Cedar Island Lake, which again is adjacent to this lower end of the Civic District and could potentially be impacted. One of the things we want to look at is, what recreation opportunities are currently available and how do they compare to the overall characteristics of the White Lake Township lake community. Some opportunities that we see in this Brendel Lake shorefront. There's an existing boat launch, beach area, and swimming. That's part of the campground. We have a private beach and swimming area for this neighborhood. And then we have a large portion of natural, undeveloped shorefront. And so these are things that we see as potential opportunities for intervention and to integrate into our development plans and concepts as we look at this district study as a whole. Again, looking at the characteristics of those things. This is that private beach that's available for this neighborhood. The natural shorefront with its wetlands, it really provides a lot of natural beauty to the area. and could be a very strong asset and opportunity as we look at this district as a whole. And then the beach swimming area that's part of the campgrounds. Again, the wetland area, for developers, it was a hindrance, we'll say, a bane of their existence. Really creates some difficulties.
Speak up a little more.
Yeah, I apologize, of course. The wetlands can provide potential difficulties in development when you talk about big box retail areas and the necessity for the large surface parking and the large footprints. When you see wetland areas like this that impact your parcels in your developable area, these sorts of larger developments become more difficult because of the impact that they have on the overall surface area. What we're hoping to do with our analysis and our development of concepts is to really start to utilize these natural resources as assets and amenities and start to integrate them and layer them into the connected network that we're trying to create, the infrastructure that we're trying to impact, and really make these assets to the development as opposed to difficulties and hindrances to the overall development impact. Then White Lake Township, I would say, is a little bit unique in the number of school districts that are layered in the boundary. So we have 5 school districts that fall within White Lake Township. We see that as really a great opportunity to start to layer the educational community into the potential programming opportunities that could be available within this civic district. There's a lot of partnership opportunities that could happen between the library, the township hall, developers, et cetera, that really these large quantities of districts create really potential great assets. And then the individual schools that are in the area in White Lake Township are clustered fairly closely to our development. So we really want to focus on how we can integrate these schools into a concept that can work both for them, for educational opportunities, as well as work for the district for opportunities to integrate those educational opportunities with youth impact and multi-generational programming and start to create a really strong sense of community. It really sort of concludes the informational impact and the analysis that we've done on the physical landscape for the Civic District within White Lake Township. The next steps that we want to look at is how we can solicit your feedback in a very productive way. And the way that we are doing that is through a series of surveys that are based online, as well as a map-based survey. So there's opportunities to really create qualitative input that is tied specifically to a location that can start to inform some of the decisions that we make when we look at creating opportunities for this area. The survey is a Google format. It's available now through social media links that have been provided on the township website, the library's Facebook, etc. So we encourage everyone to talk to their friends and share it through their social media so that we can really reach as broad of an audience as possible to get as much feedback, because really we're looking for the community to guide this development so that we reach as many people as possible and create opportunities for as many people as possible. So there's a strong motivation and a galvanized encouragement behind the entire process. So we are asking that everyone provide an email address when they fill out the survey. This allows us to really stay in touch as this process continues so that we can follow up on anything that we might need to follow up on and keep you informed of developments as they occur. These are the types of questions that we have formulated within this survey. So things like really pointed questions so that we can get a quantifiable, qualitative analysis of your input. So things like, would a central civic campus and district help provide an identity for White Lake Township as a whole? And that will really start to define kind of the decisions that we make moving forward when we start to look at concepts. And then a lot of the demographic information to really understand the input and the types of input that different people are providing. So understanding what the current housing situation is for people within White Lake Township, how long people are staying in homes, and the size of homes, so we can really focus any sort of development efforts around the majority of people that could potentially be impacted by them. Then we have a lot of check all that apply, check things that are most important to you, defining things on a scale of importance so that we can understand, really what items, what elements that could be a part of this development are going to be most important to the community as a whole. And then our other form of input that we're hoping a lot of people can participate in is this map.social setup. So it's a location-specific input device. So people can go to specific areas and really give pointed commentary on how they feel about White Lake Township and its specific area. So when you click on the link or when you type in the URL, you'll land on this page. So this is the home page. Then you'll have a series of navigation opportunities here at the top. We're going to ask that everyone register when they log in so that we can stay in contact with everyone and we have an understanding of who's commenting and who's contributing to the overall study. This is what that registration page looks like. So it's going to ask you for an email and a password and a name that will display with your comments. It doesn't have to be your name, it can be a surname or an avatar, just something that we can use to associate comments with. And then these are more demographic type information that most of it is optional. The only thing that we're asking that is required is your city of residence, so that we know if you are directly within White Lake Township, if you're in one of the surrounding communities that might be impacted by this overall study, and then your age, so that we can understand the demographics that are participating and what specific areas different age groups might be interested in. There's also opportunities to register through your social media, which is great and we encourage because it allows you to share with as many people as possible. And the more input that we get from the community, the better the overall outcome will be, because we'll have a very broad range of information that really starts to define quantifiable analysis points of what the community thinks about specific things. So here's the sample of the kind of input user interface. So this is the map gallery. You just click on map gallery, and that is how you'll get to this page, or you can start to input your comments on specific locations. In order to do so, what you'll do is you'll click on one of these icons, and each one of these icons is a specific category that we're interested in. Star, for example, being an asset, something that we think is great for White Lake Township. This one is a desired development area. So right here at the corner of Elizabeth Lake Road and Highland Road, I'd love to see a coffee shop there. That'd be great use for that corner. I'd go there and have coffee after I drop my kids off at school. Potential difficulties with the way White Lake Township and the Civic District specifically is set up right now. So I almost got hit by a car here. Those are things that we want to know so that we can understand where the difficulties are and how a potential redevelopment and the kind of cohesive look at the entire district could provide better infrastructure and better connectivity for the residents as a whole. one of the categories that we added that we think is really necessary for this specific study is a recreation-based category. So it's this icon, and it's called recreation. Over here, this is one of my favorite fishing spots. This is the best place to catch big bass. So those are things that we want to look at that we could potentially leverage as opportunities to make these areas amenities for the community and really create the broadest impact. Again, I'm going to leave this up on the screen so that you have a chance to take pictures or jot down the URLs so that you can participate in these feedback loops that we're looking for to really get the community involved in as much as possible. I thank you for your time. You guys have been wonderful, and I appreciate everyone coming out. I'm going to turn it back over to Mike so he can conclude and summarize and turn it over to the next stage of the evening.
I don't even need that face. Doesn't he have great hair? If I was him and I had that avatar name, I'd put great hair guy. It's an inside joke. I feel really bad for him. We tease him about it all the time, but I hope this was informative for you. I feel like there's probably a lot of information that's been thrown out here. So one of the things that you have is, as we're going through the boards and things like that, you wonder about information. So there's kind of a summary of a lot of that information out there. So feel free to walk by, look at it, reference it, photograph it. I'm going to ask Sean real quick, are we going to be able to, we can have this presentation up on the township website so that they can get access to it too? Absolutely. We will do that. So that way you will have the reference of the whole thing digitally as well. So that will be available to you. The last part of this, I hope that makes a little bit more, makes a little bit more sense than when I discussed it without any visuals on utilizing Map Social and the survey. But if it isn't clear to you, so what we have is, again, that area outside back. I'm going to dismiss you guys in a couple of seconds. We'll have 6 of us that will be out there. Myself, my name is Michael, Eric Klooster. We have Wendy and Estrelita, like, hold your hands up. That's Wendy on the left, Estrelita on the right. And our Adam and Kiara. I got Kiara right here. And there's a great Canadian gentleman who's outside kind of like monitoring the whole thing right now. His name is Adam. So feel free to grab any of us if you have questions about how to access that. Again, there's computers that are out there. We'll show you how to get registered so you can see how to do it, how to kind of go through the survey if you have any questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and conclude this presentation. Thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to working with you in the future.